Boris Johnson may have survived the so-called Partygate scandal, a saga we have watched in astonishment from Australia, but the election result last weekend in my country proves that his real danger comes from his policy agenda. Our former Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been handed a harsh lesson that if you disillusion your Conservative base support with centrist policies, then they will abandon you. Last Saturday, Australians did not overwhelmingly vote for a Labour government. They overwhelmingly voted against Scott Morrison's Liberal Party, our version of your Conservatives. Like most Western leaders today, Morrison lacked policy initiative, political courage, and conviction in messaging. Not only that, on most issues where he should have stood tall and led the way, he walked away from conservative and liberal principles. He now leaves behind a party base which is totally disillusioned with the party they once loved and supported, not entirely dissimilar to what Boris Johnson is doing with the UK Conservative Party. The slide has been occurring for years. In 2013, Tony Abbott was elected to end the nightmare that was a chaotic and incompetent Labour government. Australians were relieved. Abbott was then unceremoniously knifed, 2 years after leading the Liberals to a convincing victory which should have cemented his leadership, after a coup staged by his communications minister, Malcolm Turnbull. From there, the Turnbull government barely scraped through at the 2016 federal election, losing 14 seats and securing 76 seats, the minimum required to form a majority government. From there, the lurch to the left continued despite the warning signs, as did the policy failures and warped priorities. When it came to Australia's drought in 2018, the Turnbull government only offered farmers a piddling $190 million in support. These were people who had lost everything. But in the same week, he gave the Great Barrier Reef Foundation $444 million despite the charity never asking for a government grant. And at the time, the Liberal Party kept fighting for a $17 billion corporate tax cut. Turnbull then co-authored the Global Compact on Migration with the United Nations, which would allow the United Nations to determine Australia's immigration policy. But eventually it was his Labour-light climate change policy which he dubbed the National Energy Guarantee, which would be his downfall. His treasurer, Scott Morrison, was voted leader. At the 2019 federal election, Morrison proposed no policies, just opposed Labour's, in order to win the election, with a primary vote of 41%. He described it as a miracle. He was right. Many of the bookies did not see it coming. But after that narrow victory, the Morrison government remained largely undefined, with voters never really sure where it stood on the big issues facing Australia. The issues of housing affordability, integrity in politics, aged care, tax reform to suit the times, energy policy and, more recently, runaway inflation, all these issues were left up in the air. Morrison, who always described himself as a pragmatist, which is code for not having any political convictions, had no definitive answers on the big policy questions of our day. Not only that, after 6 years in opposition describing Labour as economic vandals for plunging Australia into debt, the Liberal Party, pre-COVID, continued the government spend-a-thon. So, here is Australia with a population of 25 million, now faced with $1 trillion debt, at a time when the Labour Party and Green left independents who won many inner city seats on Saturday, want to phase out Australia's mining sector. Australia's resources export revenue reached a high of $351 billion in 2021, contributing 68% of Australia's total export revenue in 2021. And these people want to abolish such an industry in the name of climate change. This money is what pays for our schools, hospitals, roads, and huge social welfare bill. The final straw, however, for many liberty-loving Australians was Australia's long lockdowns and intense restrictions, with not only international borders closed, but also interstate borders. It was even worse here than in the UK. From the very beginning, we were told lockdowns and restrictions were designed to flatten the curve, not wanting to overwhelm the hospital system. No one objected to that thinking. But the stretch too far was when authoritarian state premiers did as they pleased, changing the rules willy-nilly and lecturing the public non-stop. They, themselves, failed to protect the elderly in aged care homes and never sacrificed $1 from their salaries.